Okay, hi folks. Welcome to part 3 of tonight. I realized that I'm not exactly doing the exercise. I'm going to share my screen. Hold the exercise in the back of your mind for a second, because I'm modifying a little bit, because I'm showing you some extra stuff that's not in the exercise. So we'll come back to the actual details of the exercise at the end. So for now, I'll just forget the exercise for just a minute. What I've done during the break is I've changed my code to have divs inside of divs. It makes it a little simpler for a few reasons. I was trying to put a text line right on a span, which of course doesn't work because a span is an inline level object, and you really only align things left or right on a block level, because an inline level element like span sits in the middle of some text, and it doesn't really make sense to align it to the right or left. So when I looked at that, I was like, oh, of course. So I changed the code. I just have divs inside of divs for now. So what I have is, here's the structure. Here's an image. The image is highlighted there. The image is inside of a div. And the div has a class of photo box. And that div ends there. Inside that div also is the photo credit div. So we have a photo credit div and the image inside of the div class of a class of photo box inside the larger div, which would normally be thought of as the paragraph. So I've just changed the tags on that. Essentially, it's just nested divs, just to make this a little simpler. Divs inside of divs inside of divs. Now, so we're back here again, and I put this credit here, and when I text a line right, now it works because it's in a div and not a span. So that's the logic there. I didn't ask you to do this extra stuff with credits and everything in the exercise. The exercise is actually simpler than what I'm demonstrating. So let me demonstrate this technique, and then we'll get back to the specifics of the exercise, which is actually going to be easier than what I'm showing you, but will include most of the same stuff. So I'm still working on this photo box. I now have a credit, and I've aligned the credit to the right under the photo. Now, I also want to put a caption in here, which means I probably want to make the photo credit slightly smaller. And when you make text really small, like for a photo credit, sometimes you want it in all caps to set it off from the other text around it. And you can also get away with making the text smaller when you do it in all caps. So I could do all caps two ways. I could literally type in all caps, or I could apply a style to it. So if I were to type in all caps, I would simply type photo : John Gofsky in all capital letters. But as you might guess, there is a CSS property. And let's go back to our reference. Let me open up a web page here. Do you remember that htmlhelp.com, the one that's the old reference that I seem to like so much? Just because it's quite simple. It's good for, oh, HTML help, htmlhelp.com. And go back to the CSS style guide. Oh, that's really big, isn't it? And CSS properties. And if we look at text properties, we'll see a few things like, where is it? Text transformation. So the text transformation property, which is called text transform, allows you to make something in all uppercase or initial caps. And so uppercase means it will capitalize everything. So you see the example here, text transform uppercase. So if I apply that style here to the credit, which has the class of photo credit, let's see what happens if I do that and I save that. Well, it's good, but now the size is a little too big. So now let's change the size. Font dash size. Okay, so when you're setting text size, you can either do it in absolute, like numbers of pixels, or you can do it as a percentage or in ems, which are proportional. So let's say that we want that to be smaller than the standard font size around it. And if I say 80%, let's see what happens, 80%. So I can say percent. I'm going to actually change it to ems, but let me show you percent first. I save that, and then we reload that, and it's 80% of the size of the other default text. Now it's in all caps, so it looks still a little bigger. Let's say 70%, and I save that, and I reload. It might be something that's kind of more close to what I was thinking about. Now, I mentioned sometimes there's a problem with using percents. The problem with percentages is that they compound. So if you have something with a percentage and then it's inside a parent element that also has a percentage of its parent, that the thing inside will be 70% of 70%, for example, which gets exponentially smaller. It's logarithmic rather than just the way you'd think it would work. So percents are tricky. You never want to nest something with a percent specification in something else with a percent specification. So in my world, it's a lot easier to avoid percents. So you don't have to worry about that nesting a percent inside a percent and getting an exponentially smaller or larger thing that you're not expecting. And 0.7 ems is the same as 70%. So if I say 0.7 em, I'm essentially saying the same thing as 70%, but ems don't compound when you have ems inside of em specification. So if I do that and save that, you shouldn't notice any difference at all. It's still 70% of the default text, but now I've defined it as 0.7 ems. 1 em would be the same size as default text. And so you can extrapolate that. So ems are a very handy way to specify font sizes because they're proportional to other font sizes and you don't have to worry about the percent problem. So now we're looking better. That's kind of, you see how I've got the credit here? How does that look to you guys? Do you think it's about the right size maybe?
Yeah, it looks good.
To give it more context, now we're going to add a caption under that. And the caption, of course, won't be in all caps. And maybe I'll make it italic and not flush right so that it sets off even more. So if we go back to our content here and I want to put a caption explaining the photo under the credit, which sits by the photo, then I would type, let's see, we've got, this is the div that contains the credit. So right after that, I'm going to add, now I could, just for fun, we're going to make another div. We're going to have divs inside of divs inside of divs. And I'm going to say class equals photo caption. I'm going to create a photo caption class. By the way, this is a wordy way to do it, and later on I'm going to show you some shortcuts when we get into complex selectors where you don't have to create as many classes. But for now, this is the way we're going to do it. And we need a little angle bracket there. So now, let's see. Masks can be fun and decorative as this mask illustrates. I don't know. Does that sound okay for a caption?
I like it.
Okay, and I'm going to save that. Now we see what happens. Do you remember when I said we didn't put a width on the thing that's floating? It might be time now to put a width on the photo box because I don't want the box to grow if a caption is long. I want it to break the caption into 2 lines. So we go back to photo box and now we're going to put a width on it. But now we have a problem because if we don't know what the width of the photo is and we adjust for the right spacing, it's not going to look right. So let's start by just saying width : and this is on the photo box itself. The photo is, I think, 250 pixels wide. I'm going to say, for now, 270, just for fun. It's not exactly the way I want it to look. With 270 pixels, and that is on the photo box. That's better, but it's not exactly right. Now, let's say that I was going to use this little building block with different photos, and maybe the photos have different widths. If I hard code a width into this block of code that I want to reuse, this photo box class and so forth, then I would have to go in and change it manually for each photo. Now, sometimes you can't get around that, but sometimes you can be a little more creative. Now, if I, for example, define the width of the photo box at a certain width, like 270, but then I say that the image should be a certain size within that, I can make the image a % of the photo box so that the image will still expand to go to the sides of the photo box regardless of the size of the photo box, meaning that I could use different size images in the same size photo box and they would resize to the size of the photo box. So there are a couple ways out on that. You could actually physically put in the widths of the images and the boxes the way you want them and make them line up right. And that's easy unless you're doing a whole bunch of them. For example, I could manually just say, you know what, I'm just going to use this one block of code. I'm not going to reuse it. So I'm just going to adjust this until I get it to where I look to try 260 pixels and, you know, maybe 250 pixels. You know, I can keep going down till I, you know, eyeball it the way I want, and so forth. And that's quite a bit. That's almost exactly what I want. But I've hard coded the width. So, okay, that works for now. But another thing I can do is I can say that the photo box width is fixed, but I can put a width on the image that says make it 95% of the photo box size. And then the image would just adjust to the size of the box. So you could do this a couple of ways. I'm going to leave that like that for now because it's simple. And I'm not asking you to do anything too complicated in the exercise. I want to get back to this caption because I want to format that a little differently to set it off. Maybe captions sometimes are italic. What do you think? Anybody think that's okay? If we go back to this guide here and we look at text decoration is whether or not it has a line under it. I could just do a standard, you know, I'll just do a standard italic text style. So I'm going to style this type. That type is here, which is in the class of photo caption. So new class that we have to style, photo caption. See how classes are very handy. And if we say, we look at our font properties. I don't know if you remember font properties here. And font variant, I'm sorry, font style rather, is where you select italic. What is the difference? Why are some things called font properties and some things called text properties? Or the real question is, what is the difference between a font and text? Does anybody know why we split those up into font properties and text properties? Think about it for a second. Look at the font properties.
How it looks. Yeah, how it looks or how it versus how it behaves.
Well, yeah, but that's not the essential. The essential difference in font and text has to do with what it is.
Right. Fonts are your different styles of characters, whereas text properties is your actual content.
Well, you're getting closer. Text is a block of text. Font could be one single letter. So a font, when you style a font, you're styling the characters. When you style text, you're styling a block of text. So when you're talking about the space between words, word spacing, which is called tracking in typography, the space between letters, which is called kerning, text decoration, which is whether or not you have a line under something like a link, vertical alignment, how high or low the line of text sits, and so forth. These all apply to blocks of text, where these apply to a character. You see, the fonts are characters, the text is blocks of text. So that's why some things are called font properties, some things are called text properties. So font style is where I want to select italic, you see. It's not a text property. So here I say font style italic.
Is it still italic, or is it emphasis now, or whatever that was?
Well, I actually want italic. I want it to be italic. Now, in this case, it's specifically a style that I want that text to be in, and it's not just emphasized or not emphasized. So in this case, it's appropriate to say italic.
Got it.
Because that's specifically what I want. So I save that, but that's a good point. And it didn't work. And it should have worked. Because
That's because
I don't
you
have
have
a
a dash instead of a period in front of photo.
The typos would help. Huh? Okay. And now, okay, that's pretty close. I might want just a tad of space between the caption and the credit. What do you think? And how would I do that? The good old margin. I could put a margin I could put a top margin on the caption, or I could put a bottom margin on the credit. Would achieve the same effect. You got a preference? I'll put a top margin on the caption.
Credit, maybe work down.
I'm going to say margin colon. Now I could say 0, 0. Oops, not O's. Don't use O's. You have to use zeros. 0, 0, 0, 0, and that just doesn't change anything. That just says there is no margin, and I could save that and go back here and reload, and it really doesn't do anything. But top right, bottom left, top. So let's say I said 5px. See how that works. Save. Oh, it's just about the way I want it to look. See how this works. See how you use the box model. I think that's pretty close. I could fine tune a little more. I could make it bold italic maybe to set it off more. I think I'll leave it italic. What do you guys think? Do you like my little photo box steely? Anybody?
That's cool. That's great.
Yeah. Here's the thing. As long as I keep the photo size right in relation to the width of the box, this will work on any photo, as long as I use the same structure of having the div and the div and the div, and the photo credit and the photo caption and so forth. And so this little block here of styling is something that, you know, over time you come up with these little blocks of code that you reuse in different websites even. And so once you get something like this the way you like it, you might be doing another website and go, yeah, I want to put a photo, I want to have a credit with it, I want to have captions. Oh, I'll just take that same block of code, put that in my style sheet, you know, change a few things, you know, but use the same classes, whatever. And when you have a class called photo box and a class called photo credit and a class called photo caption, when somebody's looking at the style sheet, they know exactly what they're looking at. You see what I'm saying? It's not like style 1, style 2, style 3, or whatever Dreamweaver does when you create styles in Dreamweaver. So it makes sense to name your classes in a logical way so that, you know, 2 years from now when you're looking at it, you're like, oh, I forgot what I did. Oh, I see what I did. You don't have to think about it. So that's one approach. And that, I'm not asking you to do anything that complex with the exercise. I just wanted to show you how to use some of these properties in a more building block kind of way so that you could start to reuse pieces of code to do this kind of stuff.
Thank you.
So, by the way, you know, I might decide, oh, you know what? I want to float that to the right instead of the left, and that would be fairly easy to do, right? What would I do?
You would just change it to right.
Exactly. So I save that, and And we have that.
Hey, to fix that annoying
Now, if I
margin,
do that, however, I have to change my margin from putting space on this side to putting space on the left instead, right? I would have to change that. So
Right.
I probably am going to go back to left because that's how I designed it. But of course, I could just tweak it minorly and do that, make it to the right if I wanted to. But floats are kind of handy. You can do a lot with floats. Floats are inherently responsive because you can do multiple consecutive floats, which will then change the layout based on the size of the window. So there's a very rudimentary way to do responsive design. There are better ways to do responsive, but a very simple way is you can do a lot of responsive design by simply using floats. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say, I'm going to kind of destroy this a little bit. Let's push all that out of the way for a second. I'm going to take my little photo box, which is that. All right, I'm going to copy that. And I am going to what is he doing? Save. So here we have very rudimentary responsive design. So if you have a wide screen or a narrow screen, what's happening is these are called multiple consecutive floats because each one of these is floating to the right. Let me get, you know what? Let me get rid of the text because that, let's see. I don't want the text there. Should just delete that. I guess it's okay if this, but I just was going to get rid of this text, and then you would clearly see. But you can see it now. So if you have a situation where you want to be able to have your layout change based on the width of the window, then multiple floats consecutively, you know, it is easier if I get rid of all the text. Let me just get rid of all this stuff.
What if you gave it a clear?
Save. Well, then I wouldn't get the same effect.
Oh.
Oh, actually, no, I would. Well, let me just, actually, you're right. That would do it. Let me just get rid of it completely there for now. So, oh, I still have that stupid, okay. So the point is that if you have boxes that are floating and you have multiple consecutive floats, then it's inherently responsive design. Forget those buttons are there. So that your grid shifts. This is the opposite of using table-based design where you have a fixed grid that does not change in the number of rows and columns. Here, essentially, you have rows and columns that are responsive based on the size of the window. And when we get into using grids and Flexbox, you'll see a much better way to do this. But this is very easy and rudimentary way to do some very simple responsive design. These are just multiple consecutive floats because the first object is here floating to the left, but there's nothing else. But then you add another one and it floats to the left of this. You add that, it floats to the left of this. This floats to the left of this and so forth. And so because it's just a float, it'll wrap down. So it's a really, floats are very handy for a number of reasons.
John?
Yeah.
Is the first one in the upper left-hand corner always going to be in that corner?
Well, if it's float left, yeah. If it's
So if it's in order going down, it's also the same order going across.
yeah, it'll go across and then down, just in the normal text flow.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Left to right, top to bottom, exactly. Yeah, so floats are very handy. Oh, I just really messed it up now, didn't I?
So I have a quick question so
Yeah.
is that what you mean by the way that the text flows? Because whenever I'm like messing with it a little bit here,
Mhm.
whenever I make my browser a little smaller, the text seems like it has a little bit of the text right next to the image, and then it jumps underneath the image, kind of thing. Like it has like a gap. And
Well,
then
you
when
mean
I
like here, where now it jumps underneath?
yeah.
That's what it's supposed to do. Is yours doing that?
It's probably because I don't have enough text
Yeah,
typed onto mine.
yeah. You probably want more text if you're going to float a larger image. Yeah.
Mm.
So what I did is actually a little different than the exercise. So let's take a quick look at the exercise, because what I did is a little more complex. I didn't use, I didn't say to do exactly this, although if you want to do exactly that, that would be fine. The exercise just, let's go back to the exercise. The exercise, I just really wanted you to get your hands on these properties. So I say an image and a paragraph and a div, and I did a div and a div and a div. It was just easy for me to write it this way because I wanted certain things applied to the image, certain things applied to the paragraph, and certain things applied to the div. So you can do something similar to what I did. You don't have to have captions and credits and all that, but this is more just getting, here I'm really introducing you to the concept of using classes to build blocks of code that you can reuse, as well as getting familiarity with the box model. So, so you can see we've used padding, we've used margins, we've used borders, and the box model is quite handy and easy. So what I ask you to do here is actually just something very similar, but instead of divs within divs within divs, I say put a, where is it? A paragraph, an image within a paragraph in a div, and I'm asking you to do credits and captions. You could add stuff if you wish, but this is actually simpler than that. But I want you to apply more styles than I did by using padding, border style, border width, margin, background color to different pieces of this. And this is pretty straightforward. It just tells you what to do. How you want to lay it out and flow them around and do your margins and all that is up to you. As long as you actually do what it says, you've got a lot of freedom here. And if you, instead of doing the image in a paragraph and a div, if you want to do something like what I did, where you want to do a div and a div and a div, or change it around, that's okay. It doesn't have to be an image in a paragraph and a div, but I want to see these properties applied to the things, whether they're divs or paragraphs or whatever. I want to see you use these styles, okay? And I want you to specify them on the different pieces. So, and then modify your homepage. So it's actually a fairly simple exercise, but it will give you, by the time you do it with all these properties applied to things, you'll get a little familiarity with borders, paddings, and margins, and how the box model works. And also, of course, how floats work, because you are going to float something here. Somewhere it says you got to use a float. Where is it? Yeah, make sure you have enough text in the paragraphs that flows around the image. Yeah, you're going to float the image. And of course, you can float it left or right. All right. So the exercise is not hard. If you want to go a little extra and kind of do something like what I did, you can do that. But the point here of what I was showing you is that having this block of code that you can now basically reuse on the website. So if you're doing your website project and you're going to have photos in it, and you're going to have different photos on different pages, and maybe your photos have captions and credits, well, they should all have credits, because you should credit all the photos. Whether or not they're yours or somebody else's, you should credit them, and you should have that copyright permission to do so if you're using somebody else's, unless it's public domain. Then you always want to credit your images. And something like what I'm looking at here, having a caption with the image is a nice touch. And so if I had a website where I was going to have different images and different pages, and I wanted the styling to be consistent, I would do exactly something like this by creating a photo box class and then reusing it. Now, the reason I said that there's a simpler way to do this with creating fewer classes has to do with CSS selectors. So I've actually finished covering what I wanted to cover for this, but we have a few minutes left, just a few. So let me just explain what I mean, and you don't have to do that this week, but we're going to get into selectors that are more complex. So I created a class called PhotoBox, a class called PhotoCredit, and a class called PhotoCaption. I could have gotten away with only creating one of those three classes. For example, I would have created the PhotoBox class, which is the parent of the whole little ball of wax that we're looking at here, the thing that's floating that has all the stuff in it. And instead of creating a class called PhotoCredit and PhotoCaption, instead, I could say something like, if a div is a child of a div, and the parent div has a class of PhotoBox, do this. If a div is a child of a div, which is a child of a div that has a class of PhotoBox, style it like this. There are different kinds of selectors based on in effect, the kinship chart. So in this structure, I have a div inside of a div inside of a div, right? But I could use that structure to select what I want to style rather than creating a class to do the same thing. So there are multiple ways to use selectors. This is one way, by giving everything a class. This is a little more verbose than necessary when you understand another way to use selectors. So for example, if we think about the selectors that we've already used, we have simple or HTML selectors, such as paragraph, list item, any HTML tag or element can be a selector. In this case, I'm using I'm not using any simple selectors. I'm just using class selectors. But I could say use what's called the descendant selector, and there's another selector called the child selector. The descendant selector means if something descends from another tag, and the child selector means if it directly descends. An example is just like a kinship chart. You are a child of your mother. You are a descendant of your mother, and a descendant of your grandmother, and a descendant of your great-grandmother. But you're only a child of your mother. So child is more specific than descendant. Child is a subset of descendant. All children are descendants, but not all descendants are children, right? A mother could be a descendant of her mother and her mother's mother. So your descendants go all the way up the line, but you're only a child of your immediate mother or father, you see. So we have what's called a child selector and what's called a descendant selector. And so you can say if a paragraph descends from a div, style it this way. If a paragraph is a child of a div, style it that way. And a paragraph can be both a child and a descendant of the same div, but a paragraph or a tag can only be a descendant of one other element. Even it can descend from many, but it's a child of one. You are a child of only your parent, but you're a descendant of all those people before your parents. You see the difference between a child and a descendant. It's the same thing in CSS. We have the child selector, which is an angle bracket pointing to the right, and the descendant selector, which is literally a space. So before we wrap up, let me just give you an example that this is kind of beyond for this week, but I just want to introduce you to this for now. So you see the way I did this here, I have divs each with a class. But what if I removed the classes? Let's start with one. Let's say that I removed the class of photo caption. No, let's start with the other one. Let's say I removed the div, they're both siblings, aren't they? In this structure, I have two divs. One is the caption, one is the credit, and they are both children of the photo box. So what we say is the photo credit and the photo caption divs are siblings. I'm not making this up. This is actually the way we talk in CSS, and they are siblings because they share the same parent. Now, because I've structured it that way, it's not a div within a div within a div within a div. It's two divs within a div within a div. So there's another selector, which is called the adjacent sibling selector. No, I'm not making this up. And that's a plus sign. So let me explain that one. So let's say that this div, I'm going to break this up so it's more clear to see. Oh, you know I have a whiteboard, don't I? How does that work? Leslie, have you used that in Zoom?
No, I have not.
I think I have to unshare my screen. Let's try this.
I like letting you be the guinea pig.
There's something called a whiteboard. I saw it in here. Where is it?
Is it in your preferences?
No, it's I thought it was one of these buttons, but I don't see it. Stop security, participants chat, share screen, polling. Breakout rooms. More. Oh, I bet it's under more. Let's see what's under more. No. Darn. Okay, somewhere in Zoom there's what's called a whiteboard where you can actually just draw. It's kind of cool. And damn if I can't figure out where it is. I wonder if they got rid of it. I thought it was in here.
No,
They keep changing Zoom when I upgrade it each time.
There's a more settings, John, and you have to go onto the Zoom website and sign in, so you probably don't want to do it now.
Yeah, maybe not now.
But
Anyway, we'll
that's-
try that. Never try that next week. But there's something called a whiteboard where you can actually just draw on it. It's like a little drawing pad. It's kind of really handy if you want to just like have a blackboard. I really thought it was one of these buttons, but obviously.
I actually sent you a private chat of how to find the file upload, and it's in the same vicinity as that.
Oh, thank you
file.
so much for that. Yeah, I haven't been able to look at the chat while I've been doing this, but
Yeah, there's this gigantic whole city of preferences on the website. It's more than anyone
Yeah.
should be allowed to have.
well, anyway, I think at this point we're good for tonight. Let me just take questions. And Gary, I think you did you're like whiz kid for tonight.
So
I think you have a pretty good handle on this stuff from what I can tell.
all I'm going to say, because I have to get off, is thank you, Gary, for the help. I looked at your code and did help a little bit more than what I was. And thank you too, John, for summoning.
Wait, before people leave, I'm looking at the who's here. Who's Asus ZenPad? I'm trying to see who's actually here. Who is Asus ZenPad Z8S?
I wish I could tell you that answer, but who knows?
Okay, well, it's who's not Josh, Gary, Tony, Gabe, Leslie, or Yay. So who is
The hacker.
Asus
It's the
ZenPad?
hacker.
Well,
Huh?
yeah, you do got to watch that nowadays. I've been
The
reading.
troll.
Well, no, that's why I'm
that
wondering. I'm
hacker.
just noticing that I don't know who this is. Who is it?
That's it. Yeah, Asus ZenPad Z8S. So that's someone's ZenPad. Whoever.
Hello, person who's in my class. Who are you?
Yeah, it's James. Yeah, it's me.
Oh, it's
Asus
James.
Z8. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you, James. I just I wasn't sure if we had a stalker, and now
No.
Name
You can't see me. You can't see me because I'm sitting out on the deck outside.
Well, I don't mind that, but you can change the name in your Zoom profile to be your name.
Okay.
And you probably want to do that. It makes it easy for people when you're in these Zoom
Yes, I
meetings.
definitely will.
Yeah, but I didn't know who you were, so I'm just I'm just marking who's here, and I was like, who is Zen?
we thought you were a Zoom bomber, James.
Yeah, what I
Yeah.
generally do to quote take roll is I do a screenshot of the
I don't know what
participants
happened
window, which I'm doing right now.
Start the video.
And now I have, except for the Zen pad, I know who everybody is. Okay, so now my screenshot. Okay, folks, any other questions?
So again, same thing I opened with. You don't want us moving on to exercise 10. You want to wait. until-
You can. Yeah, let's take a quick look at that.
Skipping 9 and basically wait for 10, sort of.
Let me show you the different. Here's what happened. Is I was modifying the early. I put the local styles, classes, and IDs in here, and this was from another. The difference here is menus. So I was going to try to incorporate menus in it. See, I'm trying to shoehorn a lot of stuff into one semester because we used to have a couple semesters of this stuff.
Mhm.
and CSS media queries was actually from the second semester, as well as this one. So let's look at exercise 10, because exercise 9 we're going to do something a little different for. Oh, this is very straightforward.
That's gonna be the one we're gonna start next week, right?
Yeah, let's do this next week. This is a fun one. You'll like this because it's how to do layout.
Yeah.
And so let's do exercise 10 next week. So I'll just take out 9 and we're going to change it with something else. Maybe I'll throw in some more web typography too from the second semester there, because I've already put some other stuff in. So yeah, that sounds about right. Okay.
Quick props to Rebecca again for her coding. I was able to hodgepodge through your awesome initial work and beat me to it, and then remember how to do things somewhat correctly.
Somewhat correctly.
I did
Somewhat.
it so long ago, I don't even remember what I wrote.
It
'Cause
saved,
that was
it
like
saved
2
me
weeks
a lot of
ago.
trouble. Saved me a
Yeah,
lot
I
of-
started to try to do 9, and I'm really glad we're kind of bailing on it.
I did the same thing and I stopped. I'm like,
I start working on it and going, yeah, I'm gonna wait for John to cover that.
We've
stuff.
already done about half of 9, but not the other half.
Yeah.
It's basically using what we did for classes and IDs and
Mhm.
applying it to creating menus.
Okay.
And here we're applying things to doing some rudimentary layout, but it makes more sense to continue with the layout with exercise 10 and keep on that train and then go back to some other stuff. So we'll do 10 next week, and then I'm going to throw in some other stuff that even after the exercises are done, we have a few weeks before the final projects are due. And that's when I'm going to throw some more stuff at you that won't be necessarily exercises, but you can incorporate them into the final project. And we'll do that that way. But web typography, I could spend a little more time on. I might just do a whole module on it. That might be your exercise 10, and that is probably a good exercise 10. I think I'm going to take the web typography exercise from the next semester and kind of shoehorn it into here, because there's a lot of web typography stuff I want to cover. We just looked at very basic typography today, but it was very basic.
So is
Well,
exercise 10 becoming exercise 9? Is it sort of replacing
Yes.
it?
What you
Okay.
see as exercise 10 will now be exercise 9, and then
Okay.
exercise 10 will be web typography.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do it that
All
way.
right. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. I'll see you guys around. I have to go.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to sign off now. I think we're done.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye, Josh.
Okay, folks, stay well, practice social distancing, wear your mask in public, be cool. Yeah, look at that.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye,
Okay, folks.
everybody.
Mm.
I know.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy Easter.
Yeah.